Um, when Patricia asked me to make this presentation, my initial reaction was, well, it's very simple. There are two ways that are proposed of financing new nuclear power plants in this new world of competitive electricity markets. Britain being the first to try to do this seems to be the model that others are following. And the two models are a power purchase agreement and the contract for differences method, which is being used for Hinkley, is a power purchase agreement. And the second method is the regulated asset-based model, and that's being proposed for the new station that the government hopes will be built at Sizewell C. There is no investment agreement on that, so that has not even been tested yet. So the problem of finance is because nuclear power plants are financially risky. They're difficult to finance because they cost more per kilowatt of capacity than any other form of power generation. And the historical record of them being built is terrible. They always overrun costs. They are always late, and usually by quite a large amount. So banks are not anti-nuclear. They just don't like taking risks with their money. And so the key bodies, when you're looking at risk, are not the owners or the proposed owners of the plants, it's the financiers and the rating agencies. If Moody's or Standard & Poor's don't like a project, they might reduce the credit rating of the company involved, and that will increase the cost of their borrowing for the whole company. So nobody wants to do that. You can split the risk into two types, the market risk and the technology risk. The market risk is the external risk to the project, and the technology risk is the internal risk. So the market risk is basically comes from the risk that the market price of power is unpredictable, and it could fail to cover nuclear's cost. Now that applies to any power station, but much more to nuclear because its costs are very high and there's almost nothing you can do to avoid them. Whereas if you have a gas-fired power station, you can turn it off and you save most of your costs, which is buying the gas. So you need to keep a nuclear power plant operating from a physical point of view, even if it's losing money. This is not just a theoretical risk. In 2002, the wholesale electricity market price fell very steeply in Britain, and the privatized nuclear company, British Energy, which sold all its power into that market with no hedging, so it's fully exposed to the markets. Its costs were higher than the market price, and the company went bankrupt. And the British government chose to save it, and the cost to taxpayers, according to the British government, was something in excess of 11 billion pounds, 13 billion euros. Now, the problem with wholesale electricity markets is that they have very little liquidity. In other words, most of power is not bought and sold at market prices. So inevitably, prices are very volatile and unpredictable. Nobody would want to rely on them. So, for example, in a very cold, difficult winter's day, you might get spot prices in excess of thousands of euros per megawatt hour. On a summer, sunny, windy day, you might get market prices that are less than zero, negative prices, because people need to dump their power into the market. And the bottom line is that you won't be able to finance a nuclear power plant if its income depends on this unreliable wholesale electricity price. The technology risk is from the risk that the technology doesn't perform as expected. It costs more to build, costs more to operate, or is less reliable than expected. In other words, the cost per kilowatt hour is a lot more than you expected it to be. As a result, income from power sales, whether contract or market determines, might not be enough to cover costs. And again, you would then get the situation of the company going bankrupt. In regions where generation is a regulated monopoly, and this is the case for about half of the US states, there is a risk if the regulator does not guarantee the owner to recover all their costs. Now, this is an important proviso because in 1979, US nuclear ordering ended abruptly, and 120 orders, firm orders that had been placed, some nearly complete, some said to be 97% complete, were abandoned. And that is more reactors than the US has completed. So this, and it included all the orders placed after 1974. And it was because the regulators signaled that they were increasingly fed up with utilities coming to them saying they wanted to build a nuclear power plant for $1 billion, the utility going away, building it, and finding the cost was $5 billion. And so the regulators said, well, you're not going to be able to recover all your costs, and the utilities quickly abandoned their projects. So again, the bottom line is nuclear projects are going to be hard to finance if that technology risk falls on the owner rather than on consumers. This wasn't the case up until the time electricity became marketized, became competitive, because electric utilities could always recover their costs from consumers. So we saw in France, it was able to order 58 reactors in only 20 years because its debts were all guaranteed by the French government. So effectively, banks were lending to the French state, and lending to the French state is about as low a risk as you can get. So it was very cheap to borrow money. Now EDF is scratching its head, wondering how it can finance 6 reactors in 10 years. Developing countries like Turkey and Egypt always wanted nuclear power plants, but the reason they couldn't have them was the credit rating of the country or the utility was so poor, not because it was nuclear. So what's changed? Well, the real cost of reactors has gone up markedly. The cost in real terms, like net of inflation, is much higher than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And there's an example from Britain where our most recently completed reactor probably cost about 1/3 of what our next reactor is going to cost. Delays have got much worse. UK government commissioned some research about 10 years ago, which found that on average, nuclear power plants took between 13 and 17 years from investment decision to commercial operation. That's a long time to wait for something back on your money. Olkiluoto and Flamanville, which were completed after them, or Flamanville isn't even completed yet, are going to take 20 years, and Hinkley Point probably will take about 20 years. Cost overruns have got much worse. Same research found that the actual cost of plants was between 20 and 100% more than the estimate when the investment decision was taken. Again, Olkiluoto, Flamanville, and Hinkley Point are going to be well beyond that range. Olkiluoto and Flamanville are 4 times over budget. Now, electricity market liberalisation means that utilities are exposed to that risk. That power is too expensive, they go bust. And very quickly, when utilities realised this situation, they lost interest in nuclear power unless government was offering to take the risk off their shoulders. All European countries now have competitive electricity, more or less competitive electricity markets. In the USA, as I said, about half the system is regulated while the rest is competitive. The only US nuclear projects were in regulated states. Nothing has gone forward in a state where there is an electricity market. So what's the experience since 2000? And there is actually very little experience. In Western Europe and North America, there have only been 5 new nuclear power plant orders since 2000. Olkiluoto in 2003, Flamanville in 2005, Vogel and Summer in the USA in 2010, and Hinkley Point in 2016. Olkiluoto used what they call the Mankala model, and under that model, the main owner of the plant is a utility called TVO, which is owned by the Finnish electric-intensive industries, and they guarantee to buy all the output at whatever it costs. That model had worked very well for them in the past for non-nuclear power, but it obviously didn't work well for Olkiluoto, which was more than 3 times over budget and 14 years late. And of course, electric-intensive companies are the consumers least able to afford to have to buy expensive power. All your cost is buying electricity. You cannot afford to pay much over market price for that electricity. Preferably, you actually want a subsidized price. So the Mankala model, I don't think, is a model for anywhere outside Finland. Most countries are nowhere near as electric intensive as Finland, and they don't have that form of industrial structure. And of course, Finland's experience was so bad. In 2005, EDF was effectively a generation monopoly. Its market was theoretically open, but it generated nearly all the power for France. So EDF went ahead with it as if it was a regulated market and it could recover all its costs. It's 4 times over budget and 13 years late. And I think for the future, EDF cannot repeat that experience. It will need a different finance model. The Vogel plant in the USA was financed with US government loan guarantees. The US government itself lent the money and guaranteed all the loans itself. It was claimed it would be a monopoly facilities and all costs would be repaid by consumers. It turned out that Vogel was 3 times over budget and 7 years late, and there are court cases going on now about how that was allowed to happen. The Summer project was financed in the same way as Vogel, but at least after 4 years they abandoned it because the construction costs and time have gone out of control. This did cost consumers a lot of money, but it cost them less than it would have done if the plant had continued to be built. The 2-state electricity is regulated on a state basis. Regulators in South Carolina and Georgia, the 2 states where these plants were sited, changed the laws so that they could finance them in this way. And they gave the utilities of strong assurances that they would be able to recover their costs. And that was a promise they couldn't keep. The laws were repealed, and that model is not going to be repeated in the United States. Hinkley Point was financed using the contracts for difference method. It's 100% over budget at present. It's 6 years late, and there's still 7 years of construction left. So there is every likelihood it's going to turn out as badly as Olkiluoto and Flamanville has been outdone. The contracts for difference model has been abandoned in the UK for nuclear because no developer will go near it because it's too risky for them. Slight point on the side, interest during construction. Clearly, you borrow money to build a plant, and that incurs interest costs. When you see a quoted cost for a nuclear power plant, it's almost always overnight cost, which is the cost excluding the interest incurred during construction. So it's overnight because it's the cost that would have been if the plant was built overnight. Started one day, completed the next day. So no interest incurred. It's a very variable amount of money because it depends on how long you're building the plant. The longer you're building it, the greater the interest. And it also depends on the interest rate. The higher the interest rate, the higher the interest you'll incur. EDF estimated that the interest during construction might be the same order of magnitude as the construction costs. So you'll see the latest costs for Hinkley are £47 billion. So the actual cost and the cost that consumers will pay could be double that, nearly £100 billion. So there are two basic current models for finance that Britain has pursued or is pursuing. The power purchase agreement, of which the contract for difference model is a type, and the regulated asset base, which is the one that we want to use for the next plant. These are being proposed in other countries. There's no standard format, and each will have its own particular quirks and elements to fit it into that country. Contracts have to be for a long time, or perhaps even for the life of plant, because there is such a lot of capital up front, it needs a long time to pay it back. And the terms of the contract must be take or pay. So the owners will be paid whether you can use the reactor's output or not. And this is becoming more and more relevant because on a windy, sunny summer day, with plenty of solar and wind power available, we might not need the nuclear power plants. And so you can already see that in some European countries on the occasional day, the wholesale price could be negative. Power purchase agreement is not necessarily for a fixed power purchase price, but for nuclear, it almost certainly will be. Power purchase agreements might be used if some or all of the power is sold direct to a particular consumer rather than being sold into the electricity market. Now, selling the output to a particular consumer is very risky because all the risk falls on them, whereas if it's sold into the electricity markets, it's spread over all consumers. So while Flamanville and Hinkley Point are going horribly wrong, they are a small part of a very large market, and consumers frankly won't notice it that much. If you put it all on one particular consumer, they certainly will do. Contracts for differences were invented long before they were proposed for nuclear power, and they were first used in 1990 when the British market was opened up to competition, and new gas-fired power stations were all financed using a contract for difference between privately owned generation companies and privately owned electricity retail companies. They didn't go well for gas, but the reputation was that they had worked. Contract for differences is a form of a power purchase agreement which you use when the power doesn't have a specific customer. In other words, it's sold into the market. And it's called a contract for differences because the income of the owner of the plant comes from two sources. It gets part of its money from selling the power into the market at whatever the market price is. The difference comes from a subsidy from consumers, and that makes up the difference between the power purchase price, the price that they sell the power to the market, and the agreed contract price. So, and with a two-way contract for difference, if the contract price is higher than the market price, the retailer pays the generator. If it's less, the generator pays the difference to the retailer. So the income to the buyer and the seller is fixed regardless of what the market price is. Contract for differences is just a way to get the money to the two parties. And of course, from your point of view, it really doesn't matter. The amount you pay will be fixed. How that money gets to the buyers and sellers is of no interest to you, but it's something that makes the process seem a little more complicated and clever, and politicians always like to do that. So what's the experience with Hinkley? In practice, the power is sold to a government company which was set up for the purpose. It's called the Carbon Contracts Company, and it's sold at the market price on a 35-year contract. The Low Carbon Contracts Company then sells it on to the electricity retail companies, who have no choice but to buy it. They buy their share of the output. So if you're a retail company that has 10% of the market, you must buy 10% of the output of Hinkley Point C. Power from offshore wind is sold in the same way as this, with the contracts for difference, but the contract is only for 15 years. The subsidy is paid by the retail electricity companies, but they pass that on to consumers. So consumers effectively pay. Power purchase, the CFD has only been used for nuclear for Hinkley Point C. And as I said, this is still 7 years away from completion. When the contracts were signed, it was assumed that the construction cost would be £18 billion. And the power purchase price was £92.5 per megawatt hour, 9.25 pence per megawatt hour. And that cost is fixed and won't change whatever the cost of building the plant is. The latest estimate is £35 billion in 2015 money, or £47 billion in today's money. The power purchase price was set in 2013, but all those cost overruns fall on EDF. So it's a loss maker to EDF now. And in the most recent report and accounts of EDF, it wrote off 12.9 billion euros of its investment in Hinkley Point C because it's bearing all the cost of all those overruns. It still has to find £18 billion to complete the plant. And in its most recent annual report, it said, EDF is actively seeking financial solutions until the commissioning of Hinkley Point C. And everybody knows what that means is a begging bowl to the British government, please help us finance the remaining cost of Hinkley Point C. At the same time as the contracts were signed for Hinkley Point C, EDF agreed to start a new project to build Sizewell C, also using this contracts for differences model. But within a year of that contract signing and before construction had actually started, EDF realized belatedly what at risk the contracts for difference model actually was, and it said it would not go ahead with Sizewell using this CFD model, and it proposed the regulated asset-based model for Sizewell. Under the British process, what happens is that when a project is announced, a company is set up, and the job of that company is simply to take the project from its announcement to the point when an investment decision is taken. At that point, another company takes over. That Sizewell consortium was 80% EDF and 20% a Chinese company, China General Nuclear. 3 other nuclear projects were announced around that time and were expected to use contracts for differences, but all of them had collapsed by 2021 because there were no investors. In one case, the government had even offered to take a 30% stake in the project, and it would provide all the finance for the project at preferential rates. And despite this, no other investors came forward and the project collapsed. Contracts for differences appear to have worked very well in UK offshore wind. 15-year contracts with real prices have been awarded with real prices falling by 2/3 in only 6 years. So in 2015, the price for new offshore wind was £140 per megawatt hour. In 2021, it had gone down to £40 per megawatt hour. And CFDs work because offshore wind projects tend to be completed close to time and to budget, so financiers don't see them as a risk. So the contracts for difference model won't work for nuclear in Britain. So the new model is the regulated asset-based model, and it's really based on the US model of regulating utilities that goes back 100 years. And this model was based on the regulatory bargain. And under the regulatory bargain, utilities were guaranteed a fair rate of return on their investment if they provided a good, reliable service to consumers. So the facility owner is allowed to earn a fair rate of return on investment, as well as recovering all their operating costs. So if an investment costs $1 billion and the rate of return allowed is 10%, then the owner of that plant is allowed to make $100 million per year profit, and it will also get any operating costs repaid. What is a fair rate of return? Well, it's the rate of return that an investment of equal risk or similar risk in the normal market would be earning. So you want the rate of return to be about the same as a similar investment in the open economy. Under US regulation, companies are not allowed to start to recover their costs until the plant is ready to go and is ready to operate. And at that point, the regulator does a test to judge whether the costs incurred have been prudently incurred and whether the facility is used and useful. In other words, they want to check that the money spent was worth spending, because under the rate of return regulation, clearly, the more you invest, the more profit you can make. So you want to prevent what is often called gold plating. In other words, spending a lot more money than you need to, just so that you can increase the amount of money you can make. These principles were all broken for Vogtle and Summer, the two nuclear projects in the United States that have gone ahead in the past 15 years. And finance costs were paid by consumers for these two projects from 2010 onwards. So how does it work in Britain? Well, EDF said it wouldn't take a stake in a RAB-funded Sizewell C. In other words, it did not want to own any part of Sizewell because it was too risky. But it would supply the reactor, it would operate it and maintain it. And those are activities that were all likely to be profitable. So it was an attractive proposition for it. They're likely to be profitable because you can't specify them in advance. You don't know what's going to break down on a reactor, so you don't know how much it's going to cost to operate. So these contracts tend to be cost plus and profitable. The history with the regulated asset base was that it had been used for a major piece of water supply infrastructure, Thames Tideway, which started construction in 2016 and is expected to be complete next year. But Thames Tideway is much simpler in all respects. It has no output to sell. Basically, it's a huge tunnel under the underground in London, whose job it is to collect water flowing off the streets when it's very heavy, rather than it going straight into the river and polluting it. So basically, it's a 30-mile tunnel. Tunnels, compared to nuclear power plants, are technologically very similar. Its cost is about 1/10 of that, So it's not really the same. Under RAB, as I said earlier, the developer, and in this case, it will be Electricité de France, they take the project to the point where an investment decision can be taken. And at that point, when the investment decision is taken, they get their costs back from the final owners, because obviously EDF has no interest in spending a lot of its own money developing a project and then losing all that money. Once an investment decision has been taken, investors recover their finance charges from consumers from the day an investment decision is taken until construction is complete. And that's via a surcharge on electricity bills. So if, as is projected, there is an investment decision on Sizewell C in December, we will start paying a surcharge on our electricity bills from that day, despite the fact we're probably not going to see any power from Sizewell till about 2040. Government says that RAB will result in cheaper power than a contract for differences because finance will be cheaper. Well, it will be cheaper to the owners of the plant because they're not paying it. The reduction in electricity price will be paid for by consumers as a surcharge on their bill before the plant has been completed. And I probably won't live long enough to see the benefit of that cheaper power. We don't know what the contract duration is yet. It's probably, well, we don't know. It could be up to 60 years. When the government announced the regulated asset-based model, it claimed that the whole thing could be financed entirely by institutional investors like pension funds, like investment funds, and most of these would be British-based. This was an illusion, and we've struggled to find investors. And by March 2024, we had a short list of about 6 potential investors, but they were only going to offer about 5 or 6 billion pounds, which is far short of what's needed. Since then, there are suspicions that 1 and perhaps 2 of those listed investors have dropped out. So we are massively short of investors. One of them was a UK pension fund. That's probably the company that has dropped out. One is a UK energy company. One is an energy company from the United Arab Emirates. And 3 are European investment funds, and one of those might have dropped out. Government is refusing to give a cost estimate for Sizewell, but appears to be telling the press a figure of 20 billion pounds, and that's laughable because it claims that Sizewell will be a copy of Hinkley Point, and 20 billion is only about 40% of the latest cost estimate for Hinkley. We've already spent 8.5 billion on the project, and we haven't even got to an investment decision yet. EDF didn't want to take a stake in the project, but it's been forced to, and is going to take. It hopes to take. No, it's probably going to have to take a 19.99% stake in the project. If we assume that Sizewell actually can be built for 20% less than Hinkley, and generally the experience is that the next nuclear power plant costs more than the previous one, not less. But if we assume it's going to cost 40 billion, and we get 6 billion from our short list of 6, EDF takes 20%, that leaves the UK government to finance the rest, 26 billion pounds, 2/3 stake in the project. At least 8.5 billion pounds will be spent simply to get the Sizewell to the point of a firm investment decision. And that money goes straight into the asset base. So if an investment decision is taken in December, the interest charge will start to be charged on that 8.5 billion. So if the allowed rate of return is 10%, and that seems to be what people are talking about, that will add about 850 million to consumers' bills, about £30 per customer in the first year. And in the last year of construction, the surcharge could be as much as £130 per consumer if the plant is built to time and to cost. And of course, that is not the usual outcome with nuclear power plants. We don't know all the details yet, but it seems likely that the power will be sold at market price to the low carbon contracts company, and all electricity retailers will have to buy their share of the output. If you're a company that advertises you only supply renewables, it doesn't matter, you still have to buy nuclear output. The owners of the plant will have a contract for differences of sorts, and they will receive their income in two parts, one part from the market and one part from a consumer subsidy paid by electricity retailers who pass it on to consumers. The big difference is that with Hinkley, the price of power is fixed at a given level, and it will always be that price. With Sizewell, it's the income of the owners that is fixed, and that's why it's going to be attractive to owners, because they don't have to worry about cost and time overruns. They have their amount of money and they will get it regardless of whether the plant produces 1 megawatt hour a year or 1 million megawatt hours per year. So what's our experience with RAB? And well, EDF set a budget in 2016 of 458 million to get from project announcement in 2016 to an investment decision, which was then expected in 2020. By 2022, this money had all been spent, and the government chose to buy out China General Nuclear's 20% on national security grounds. It put in a total of 700 million to get to an investment decision. Then in 2023, it put in a further 500 million. By the end of 2023, EDF itself had spent 700 million and refused to spend any more. So British government then put in a further 1.3 billion. So we're up to 2.5 billion of government money. Then in August of this year, the government put in a further 5.5 billion. So if this is sufficient, that's how we get to that 8.5 billion, just to get to the point of an investment decision. And it's a very interesting question. How is £8 billion going to be spent this year on a process that should have taken 4 years, but has been underway for 8 years? And the simple answer is that the company, the EDF, is placing all the orders for all the equipment and doing as much preparatory work as it can. So clearly, although a final investment decision hasn't formally been taken, the decision has been taken. Government is not going to write off £8 billion of public money. The delay is trying to find some more investors and trying to negotiate the terms with them. Clearly, private investors will want any hint of risk falling on them to be written out of the contracts. Last but one slide. National governments have always been centrally involved in an enabling role with nuclear power projects. They guarantee the availability of waste disposal facilities. They exempt reactor owners from accident liabilities. So if you own a nuclear power plant, you don't have to insure it for external damages. And they, increasingly, though, government is being asked to make a much more direct financial contribution, subsidizing design development, facilitating finance, and now taking equity stakes in the plant, actually owning some or all of the nuclear power plants. It appeared at one point that sovereign loan guarantees were going to be important for nuclear. Now, under a sovereign loan guarantee, if somebody lends money to a commercial organization, and that loan is subject to loan guarantees, if the project fails, the taxpayers will repay the lender. So essentially, if you lend money under a sovereign loan guarantee, it's effectively lending money to a national government. And that's as low risk as you can get. That makes the loans extremely cheap because governments don't go bust. Loan guarantees started with Olkiluoto with about a third of the expected borrowing, about 700 million, covered by loan guarantees. Of course, in retrospect, given that the whole project costs more than 10 billion euros, that amount of loan guarantees is trivial. US loan guarantees were offered to the Vogel and Summer projects to cover 80% of the borrowing, but they weren't taken up by the Summer project because the Summer project owners said, it's not worth it. We can borrow money relatively cheaply and we can't be bothered with all the bureaucracy and the intrusive reporting that loan guarantees require. The British government offered loan guarantees to EDF for the Hinkley Point project, but EDF decided not to take them up. So these appear to be very attractive. So what's the problem with them? From the government's point of view, the problem is that guaranteed loans count in national debt, and national treasuries don't like things that increase national debt. From the buyer's point of view, a loan guarantee is like an insurance policy, and insurance policies have a premium, and loan guarantees must also have a premium, and that reflects the riskiness of the project. When the European Commission looked at the Hinkley project, and at that time loan guarantees were being offered, it required that the government increase the fee from 2.2% to 3%. Relatively small amount of money would not have affected the outcome, but the loan guarantees were not taken up. In the United States, there was a project for a nuclear power plant in the middle of the largest competitive electricity market in the United States. And that nuclear power plant would have been fully exposed to the risk of the market. And as a result, the fee was reported to be 11.5%. And that was said to be one of the main factors that actually killed off the project. Final slide. There's no model of financing nuclear power in countries that operate in a competitive electricity market that is proven to work. The option most likely to succeed is public ownership, part or total public ownership of the plant. Now, I quite like public ownership, but what I don't like is using public money to finance projects simply because no sane private financier would go near financing that project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for this excellent talk. We now do have times for a few questions to Steve before we move on to Lisa giving her input. Patricia, you're here. Does the sound work?
I don't know.
Nah.
I think do it, Gab. It's just
okay.
Just perfect. I just want to be here.
Does everyone, anyone has a question to Steve on his talk? Just questions for if you haven't understood something or.
I would like to know whether public ownership in France, if the fact that the EDF is 100% state-owned means public ownership. Thanks.
Yes, it does. That's public ownership. What is different now from when the most reactors were bought in France was that when EDF was publicly owned up until 2005, all its debts were fully guaranteed by the French government. And that's not the usual model for a nationalized industry. They're normally public limited companies, so there is not unlimited liability on the government. EDF was part privatized in 2005, and then it was taken back into public ownership last year. But I very much doubt that the French government will be guaranteeing all the debts of EDF, so EDF will have to borrow from the market. The fact that it is publicly owned will make it cheaper for it to borrow money, but it won't be as cheap as borrowing it if all the debts were guaranteed by the French government.
Okay, next one is Lorelei.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you very much. Thank you, Stefan, for this overview. It's very, very good. I have more like a practical question because I work for Greenpeace at the EU level, so based in Brussels. And as you know, we have a new parliament with new MEPs and an increasing number of MEPs who are in favor of nuclear, with the shift to the right. So I was just wondering if you're coming to Brussels from time to time, and if so, we could get in touch, because I think it would be really great for MEPs and maybe even other stakeholders here in Brussels to hear from economists and experts. So yeah, that's more an invitation to follow up. Thank you.
Okay, I will let you know if I do.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, next one, Jonas, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. So I'm from Slovenia, representing a coalition of NGOs. We are facing a referendum on a nuclear power plant in 2 months. And I have one question of the cost of the preparation time. So this 8.5 billion is so many orders of magnitude bigger than the figures we are operating with here. So maybe if you could illustrate it a little bit, because we are now talking about 50, 100, 150 million here to bring the project, which is still at a conceptual level, to an investment decision in, let's say, 2028, which is currently the plan. And some politicians say that actually the referendum will be about this, allowing the state-owned company to invest that money into the preparation of the project until 2028, even though the question is phrased like, do you support YEK 2, which is the power plant itself? So a little bit about this 8.5 billion, so that we also maybe have something for advocacy in our hands.
Right. I mean, what the money to get from a project announcement to final investment decision should cover is the cost of the planning process, going through the planning inquiries and so forth, looking at the site and checking its suitability for a nuclear power plant in terms of seismic risk, seawater, ingress risk, and so forth, setting up contacts with the potential suppliers and so forth. So that should be a relatively cheap amount. As I said, the EDF budgeted 458 million for that process. I don't know how realistic that was. They may have underestimated it. I mean, the process should have taken 3 to 4 years, but it's now gone into 8 years. But clearly, £8 billion has been spent this year. And the only explanation I can find for that is to keep the project going until the British government can find some investors. And that means doing things that they shouldn't be doing, like ordering equipment. You should not be ordering turbine generators, nuclear reactors, and so on, if you haven't taken a final investment decision. That's insane. I mean, it's preempting the final investment decision. So I think that 8.5 billion is just an illustration of how horribly wrong the process has gone in Britain, that been trying to bring in investors and they can't find them, even though it looks like it would be probably a good investment. They still can't find investors. And if you look at the material put out by government, it always talks about risk sharing. And this is unrealistic, because if there is risk, then the investors aren't going to go near it. I mean, would you want your pension fund invested in, and at the risk of a nuclear power plant? So that if the project overran in cost or time, some of your pension money would be lost. I mean, you're not going to go near that. So all that talk of risk sharing is just theoretical. You know, you'll get things like, if the project comes in under budget and ahead of time, you'll get some money back. Well, find me a nuclear power plant that has ever come in under budget and ahead of time. It's not going to happen. These are theoretical sharing just for the purposes of public relations. So, sorry, to answer your question, I don't know how 150 doesn't sound like enough to me. 150 million euros doesn't sound enough. By 2022, 2023 in Britain, it's spent about £1.5 billion. So that might be a more realistic figure. I mean, I suppose the cost would be similar no matter how big the project, because you know, looking at the site and going through the planning process, you know, it's the same whether it's one reactor or three reactors, or it's 600 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts. So I think 150 sounds like far too little.
Okay, then next one, Marco.
Yes, hello, thanks. And thanks, Steve, again. I'd like to ask a question on the because the nuclear sector, what they argue, obviously, is that the state guarantees and state intervention in the market is completely justified because of the long-term benefits of these investments. That is true. But the only problem is financing. But for the society as a whole, these are great projects because in the long run they produce electricity, stable baseload electricity, etc., over 60 or up to 80 years, as they talk about now. So, what would be your answer to that, to those arguments? And then actually the other thing, which goes a bit beyond or outside of the scope of this talk, but it's about the SMRs, the small modular reactors, which are supposed to be the solution, or one of the solutions to these problems, because they are supposed to be financially less risky and simply more financeable. So do you see them to have any hope for the nuclear industry? Are SMRs are they less risky in reality, or are they just a way for the industry to get back to build a bridge back to building large reactors?
Well, taking the first part first, I think I can conceive that there are investments that are societally worthwhile that the private sector would not undertake. The issue then is really, is this the best way to achieve what you're trying to achieve? And it becomes, and what you want to achieve is electricity generation that generates few climate changing gases. Of course, there are other environmental issues with nuclear, but that's what the objective of the project is. And you have to say, well, is that the best way of doing it? And that becomes difficult to establish because a nuclear power plant is a nuclear power plant, but renewables are different in every country. Every country has a different set of renewable resources. We have a lot of offshore wind. Clearly in Austria, you're not going to have any offshore wind. We have a very inefficient housing stock, so a lot of money could be spent on energy efficiency measures. So every country is going to have a different set of variables. I would say that in Britain, offshore wind, solar are probably less than half the price of nuclear. Whether you need other costs to make the electricity system work in terms of storage, backup, and other forms of making sure that the lights stay on, I'm not convinced there's a huge amount of that. So I don't think that argument that we have to do it because it's such a good thing for the country stands up. In terms of SMRs, we have no idea how they're going to be financed because there are no projects that are anywhere close to final investment decision yet. There is no technology that's even ready to be ordered yet. So SMRs are just a long way off. They are not. They are smaller, so they will be cheaper. Will they be any less risky? We have no idea till we try it, and I hope we don't try it because I don't think they will be. They will be smaller, although you shouldn't run away with the idea that SMRs are that small. The Rolls-Royce design, for example, is 477 megawatts, which makes it bigger than most of the nuclear power plants we've built in Britain. You know, it's a big plant, and the idea that the people like to portray of it coming on the back of a low loader, you bolting it down, and the next day the power starts is just nonsense. You need a lot of civil works, you need a lot of site proving, you need to check the sea level rising, you need to check seismicity. It's not going to be that different. And probably you're going to order them in this so that you end up with the same capacity on the site. So actually the project could end up being just as expensive as a large reactor.
So, Silva, before I give the word to you, I just wanted to ask Lisa, can you stay with us a little bit longer, or do you have to leave quickly?
Yeah, I have to leave quickly.
Okay.
Gabi,
yeah.
I can skip my question because I will come back to that anyway when I have my presentation.
Okay.
Lisa, go
Thanks,
ahead.
Silva. Okay, then Lisa, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, also, Stephen, for your presentation. It was very detailed and I learned a lot about it. So I'm definitely going to watch it back to keep learning. I am not a financial expert. I work for over a year at WISE in the Netherlands, and we have new plans for new nuclear power plants. It started a few years ago when they wanted to build 2 new reactors with a subsidy of 5 billion euros, and everybody was like, okay, that's way not enough to build nuclear power plants. But we knew that it was just a starting fund, which we were really pissed about it, but fine. And then earlier this year, it became clear that they actually wanted to spend 14 billion euros on the new nuclear power plants, which was based on the assumption that it would be 100% state-owned. And I found that also rather on the low side. But then it became even more crazy because they wanted to build 4 new nuclear power plants for the same amount of money, also for 14 billion euros. Yeah, that's not possible. We thought. So we are going to set up a campaign that new nuclear power plants are way more expensive than just those 14 billion euros, and that people have to pay a lot of taxes to finance those nuclear power plants. And one of the things on our campaign is like we did a research paper on it, or we asked a researching group to write a paper about it, and they have looked into 6 recent projects: Hinkley Point C, Flamanville, Oklioto, Votel, Shin Hanu, and Baraka. And they came to the conclusion that it is possible to build 4 nuclear power plants for 14 million euros. So we were a little bit with our I don't know how we thought, why did you came up with that conclusion? But then they explained that it would be possible if the 4 new reactors were built on time, and if 70% was funded by loans. So then we were like, yeah, it's actually not possible to build 4 reactors for that amount of money, because we haven't built any reactors in decades. So it is very likely that the building time will be delayed. And therefore the money goes up exponentially because of the interest rates. And I also need to point out that this study has not looked into how they are going to pay off those loans. So yeah, that's basically really short what I wanted to say. A little thing in the Netherlands going on right now. So in short, it's not possible if you are looking realistically at the plans for building new nuclear power plants in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much for this input from the situation in the Netherlands. Before you leave, does anyone have a question to Lisa or a comment? Well, if not, then thank you, Lisa. Thank you again. And we move on to the next input. This is from Czech Republic. Yeah, Edda is here, okay. And Patricia, you said you're going to help Edda with translation.
I try to with my bad English, but better if help Patricia, of course. Pardon, I started. Share. And can you see my presentation? No.
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah, perfect. Patricia still okay. Yeah. I try to speak about situation in Czech Republic English, but maybe some bad words, and Patricia helped me to correct. Tak, for situation in Czech, it's I need to some words about situation. We've planned new reactors. As you know, maybe in July, the tender for new reactors in Dukovany 5 ended. But this tender was extended by government for tender Dukovany 5 and 6 and 2 new reactors in Temelín 3 and 4. The winner, this tender was KHNP, Korean KEPCO, with APR 1000 reactors, new reactors. For price, this tender is around 8 billion euros. It's very cheaper, but no realistic price maybe. And in this, actually, Czech competition authority is currently investigating complaint from Westinghouse and EDF as 2 bidders in this tender. And today, Czechs preparing details this contract with KHNP for 2 new reactors at Dukovany 5 and 6, with aim to submitting to government by the end of March 2025, and financing, of course, with state aid. And today, the Ministry of Finance with Czech and other institutions found a solution this situation and planning to have a solution by the end of 2024 this year. And under note is Czech preparing 2 SMR, not only SMR reactors in Czech Republic, maybe in other reactors, other investors in Czech Republic, and all waiting to same state aid as Czech government preparing for large reactors. And Czech model, state aid model, financing. And this is a special situation because we have notified financing model for only 1 reactors in Dukovany, EDU 5, and not for other reactors. Now, some words about this model. It was described in Czech Act on measures for the transition of the Czech Republic to low carbon energy. This notified by European Commission on 30th April this year, after 2 years investigations, but still not public details of this decision, only press release and link on my presentation. The state will provide a loan of almost 100% invested in 100% price of new reactors, provide loan to Czech. This is an investor. It's about 8 billion euro. It will be interest free for the entire behind construction period, and will be repaid after commissioning new reactor, and will be repayable within 30 years. And interest rate will be 1 percentage point higher than the interesting rate on the national debt, and at least 2%. Very, very small, interesting. And second part, this state aid is offtake contract with power purchase agreement between government and Czech for all electricity generated in new reactors at the price that should ensure a reasonable rate of return on investment, just waiting minimum 9 or 11% IRR, and for chess and repayment on the loan to the state. A newly established company, state-owned, will be charge of buying this all electricity, but 70% of electricity must be sold on the open market. This is in a decision of European Commission. If the market price of electricity falls below the approved strike price, the state will pay the difference to the investor and increase the regulated price of electricity for consumers. It's a similar as contract for difference. If, on the other hand, the market price of electricity exceeded the agreed ceiling, the investor is obligated to pay the difference back to the state, which will transfer the proceeds to the state budget of or reduce the regulated component of the electricity price. The contract is concluded for a period of 30 years with the possibility of extensions by 10 years. Czech state waiting maybe all period 60 years, but European Commission limited the maximum term to 30 years. 40 years, pardon. And now about financing other new reactors, Dukovany 6 and Temelín and maybe SMRs. Tak Czech refused to finance other reactors using the same model. No, it's a bet for this financing and want this. And no ministry financing seeking results for this situation. In last year, was added to new form state aid to the law, and this form is typical contract for difference. The first part of the state aid is a state loan. It's the same as for Dukovany 5. But this model still without notification from European Commission, not starting the notification period, and it's an interesting situation that next month might be signed contract between Czech government, Czech and Korean firm about new reactors, and financing is still only for one from these two reactors. And what models will be used for second new reactors in Dukovany, we don't know. No, that's all. This is a shortly situation in Czech Republic with state aid.
Thank you very much, Eda. Are there any questions, or should we move on to the next input? Okay, then
thank you.
Thanks again. Then the next one is Silva Herman, who will give us an input from Sweden. Yeah, Silva, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Silva Herman. I used to be an anti-nuclear campaigner together with Patricia for Friends of US Europe, but that's many years ago. In 2009, I moved to northern Sweden, and now I'm working with local and regional energy strategies. However, I still follow the nuclear debate, and I try to give you a summary about what the study the investigation about new nuclear financing and risk sharing which was published this summer in Sweden. Some of the results here. And maybe some of you guys can help me out if I maybe struggle with really grabbing all the implications. But well, what asks the Swedish government for? We have now a conservative right-wing government in Sweden, and they won the elections very much on promising new nuclear. So the government wanted to get a model so that nuclear power with a total capacity of at least 2,500 megawatt, so 2 large-scale reactors, should be in place by 2035. Pretty ambitious. What did the investigation actually do? They came up with a financing model for a nuclear program for 4 reactors. And they were very clear about 4 reactors of the same type and at the same place to avoid like cost overruns. So bigger than, the maybe 2 reactors. And the basic idea is that this should fit into the target to get electricity generation up to 300 terawatt hours in total in Sweden, 2045 at the latest. The investigation also says that they need it to be 4 reactors to be able to produce enough electricity to finance the investments in nuclear waste disposal, which is an amount added to the per sold kilowatt hours. It's also said that reactors should not be less than 300 megawatt per reactor, which makes it exactly, not a small modular reactor. They ended up with the sum of 40 billion euros. And that was estimated by checking like how much does it cost to build a nuclear plant, and they came up with an idea of 8 million euro per megawatt hour. The thing is here that these 40 billion euros, it's what is communicated most, but as you will see, it's already cost overruns are part of the investigation already by now. So financing is meant to be a state loan of about 75%, so 30 billion euros, with a lower interest rate than market would offer. It's meant to be the interest rate which applies for the state. And the idea is that this interest rate is gradually raised during the operating phase to provide an incentive to replace the state loans with market financing. The next part would be a 2-way contract for differences, and that would be at price of 80 euro. That would be, if I calculate correctly, 0.07 euros per kilowatt hour, and it's for 40 years. And then the third component would be a risk and gain share mechanism that gives investors a minimum return on equity. And this mechanism is activated based on the result of a market valuation of the project 2 years after the nuclear power plant has entered the operational phase. What comes next? The proposal is that the next step is a new law to give the government the right to subsidize new nuclear. And this is something I really do not understand exactly what's meant to, but they say there should be no right to appeal decision. There's also a proposal in this law that to authorize, or the Parliament should authorize the government to decide on a loan, and it should be 600 billion Swedish crowns at a maximum of 75% of investment costs. So they include a reserve for cost overruns up to 100% already in this phase. And the CFD costs are planned to be covered by all power customers, and 70% of the produced electricity has to be sold to open power market. If there's any other PPA signed, for example, then at least 70% need to be sold to open power markets. That's what I get from the published documents. When I then try to understand why is that, and do we really need it? I just wanted to give you some insights about the situation in Sweden. Looking back at how the Swedish electricity use has developed the last decades, we can see from the graph on the left side that it has been pretty stable, as the final energy use, electricity use in Sweden for the last years. It's also, if you look at the graph at the right side, Sweden is exporting more and more electricity the last years, although the share of nuclear has decreased since 2005. So there is no really a need now to invest in nuclear at high costs, you could think, but public opinion is very much in favor of new nuclear. And the one specifically here where I live in the northern end of Sweden. And the reason is that here we have enormous projects for producing green steel, but also fossil-free fertilizer projects. And this green steel project, the biggest ones, is a joint project of 300% governmentally owned companies, a steel company, the biggest iron ore mining company in Europe, and Vattenfall. And they announced that they need 70 terawatt hours of electricity additionally in the next decade or two. And that would mean only this company need as much electricity as the electricity needed in Austria. So that's really high amounts. Sweden has already now used electricity, the final electricity consumption in Sweden is already now the double of the electricity consumption in Austria. So that's really, really a lot of electricity that we need if these projects really will be successful. So that's also what the Swedish Energy Agency is working with. However, they have a prognosis of about 220 to 340 terawatt hours in 2050. So there is quite some variation in how much electricity is needed. And this is a complicated graph, but just to give you an idea, the Swedish Energy Agency is discussing one scenario with a much lower rate of electrification in the society. That's the very first one is just how it developed in the past. The next one is a low electrification scenario, and the orange parts, that's nuclear. And then there's the next one would be a high electrification, which would mean probably a lot of hydrogen produced for green steel production. But then the next one is a scenario where this company is not as successful as they hoped for. And that would mean a much, much smaller share of nuclear even in the future. However, the investigation just assumed that we will end up at 300 terawatt hours of electricity in the next 2 decades. There is definitely no investigation done for a less electrification scenario, nor for that LKAB will, the Green Steel investment will not really make it. And there is no alternative scenario, like would it be better to just try to solve that with energy efficiency and wind power? So I think that's important when discussing this investigation. It's also just the Sweden households use electricity for heating quite a lot, both for direct electricity heating and for heat pumps. So there is politically the awareness of electricity prices is very high, and many households also using spot price market as a flexible electricity prices. So when you remember, the price for the CFD was about 80 euro, so per kilowatt hour, and these are prices for this year. We have 4 different price areas, and as you can see, it's very rarely that the price will go up that high. So probably the price is at least it's on the higher end, I would say, which makes it very likely that households will have to pay quite a lot for the new project. Yeah, that's just a short overview. If you have any questions, I hope I can answer them. And if anyone, maybe Stephen, you have something to add, because I think you know so much more about financing than I do. So if you want to add something, I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much for this interesting input into a Swedish situation, Silva. Is there any short reaction now on what Silva told us? Okay, if not, then we will complete the picture with first taking a look to Bulgaria, and after that taking a look into the Polish situation. So, Todor, you're next, please. Todor, are you here? Okay, then maybe we can shift to Poland first. Marcin. Oh, seems that neither one. Marcin, okay.
I'm here, but I
Okay.
need to toggle between the switches, and I'm trying to share my screen.
Okay.
But I guess it's here. Okay, hold on. Can you already see it?
Yeah, you can go to presentation mode.
Can you see it, Gabi?
Yeah, but not in presentation mode yet.
Okay. So just quickly, 5 minutes. I'll try to stick to the time. So
But can you, Marcin, can you put it to presentation mode first, so that it's bigger to read?
Pardon?
The presentation mode.
Again?
Can you switch it to presentation mode?
Gabi, what was the question?
Okay, sound is not so good.
I did.
You did. Okay, then please go on. Go on as it is.
Sorry. I mean, I don't know why. Oh, okay. I really don't know why. Okay.
Doesn't matter, Martin. Just give us your input, please. We will manage to read it.
Yeah. Okay, so I will cover only the first nuclear power plant within the official nuclear power program. I will skip, for example, small modular reactors, which are nowhere there in Poland, obviously. So, what will be the outcome of all of this? There will be one nuclear power plant with 3 units, and you may have heard about that that Westinghouse won the contract. Actually, there's no tangible contract as of now. The technology is obviously AP1000, so those will be 3 units at the coastline of the Baltic Sea. They will be constructed by Bechtel and developed by the Polish company called PJ, the abbreviation for Polish Nuclear Power Plants, Polskie Elektrownie Jądrowe, which is a completely state-owned investor, state-owned developer, which is supposed to invest the money, and what money I will discuss it in a moment. The plant is planned at the moment, planned to be completed by 2025 and then commissioned in 2036. I will not discuss the delays during to date during the preparation, during all the preparations, which have started like 15 years ago. Okay, so let's focus on the financial issues. The total expenditure, the capex, capital expenditures, which are only predicted, they were not enshrined in any official document in a binding way. Okay, so those costs are predicted stand at circa 40 billion euro. And no tender for I was speaking about Westinghouse, which was actually it was selected, it was appointed by the government, and no tender for that selection took place. It was not obvious from the onset that the tender will be skipped. Nevertheless, it turned out this way. Also, no tender for the EPC, that is engineering, procurement, and construction contract, is intended, as Bechtel is somehow attached to the project. Thus, in terms of this EU stated rules, some approvals and exclusions have been sought by the Polish government from the European Commission. Pre-notification negotiations started only in September last year. They have been reportedly concluding, and the minister for the potentiary for the investment project has just announced this week that he would like to open the notification procedure, and that would be completed reportedly in 2025. Some say in the midst of the year. So following this, no main business contract has been signed to date with the Polish side, either for the reactor technology supplying or for the EPC. Also, no final investment decision has been taken to date. It is not clear in what form it could be taken. Nevertheless, a lot of work at this moment. It needs to be said that a lot of work has been done in spite of the general perception, both over those 15 years and especially in the recent months, especially after the new government has taken over. And so I will be speaking in a moment about the most important development, which has been just taken this month. So is attached to some non-existent basic financing, some financial support was promised from the US side, because okay, the US side is a basis for Westinghouse and Bechtel activity, obviously, is rooted in the Polish US intergovernmental agreement, which was concluded in November 2022. That was also famous news, and that was around that time when Westinghouse actually yeah the agreement took place in October, and in November Westinghouse was selected through the governmental decree. And since then, and at that time, the US side, the US administration promised like financial support. The US Exim Bank was fiddling around and signing some, memoranda. But the Polish government now, among the scarce bits of information that it's shedding, is speaking about also some support from a number of unnamed other international financial entities, banks, etc. Probably Asian, but has never been named so far. Only US Exim Bank has been named, and perhaps in the International Development Finance Corporation. As we know, both have some only started to be active after some years of being banned from financing projects beyond the US. Anyway, that has not arrived at any concrete decisions like signing of contracts and agreements. And as I said, no concrete amounts have been declared that would be available from those IFIs. For years, it was a common knowledge that no financing scheme is in place for the Polish nuclear new build in its entirety. For some years under the previous government, it was only said that the contracts for difference could be used, but then it was all of a sudden dropped, and it was explicitly said that contracts for difference would not be used. Then there was a period under which it's sort of like no other mechanism would replace it. And then I will tell you some surprise, because just on the 2nd September, a draft bill was published by the government, which sort of accelerates the whole thinking discussion about the financing of the proposed nuclear power plant. Namely, this consists in basically increasing the initial capital of the PJ company. That's the equity, which initially had some years ago, it had some few thousand maybe euro. Then it was increased by hundreds of thousands of euro, and now it is planned to increase it. I think it's by more than 14 billion euro, which will be spread across 6 years, starting from the next year. The peak would be in 2027, that is in 3 years. And so those 14 billion euro is sort of is the total capped amount. So that is up to those particular amounts, and up to this total, the amount would be spent. The source of that of the spending would be money directly paid from the state budget, and it would be either cash or just like regular money, or depending on of course the financial liquidity, or state treasury bonds, state securities, probably mainly bonds. And all of this would amount to, in worth, would amount to 14 billion euro over this period. So what is that? It's still it's only that at this occasion the financial mechanism was not revealed. The point is, the government claims that this is this financial mechanism, or to be more exact, as they call it, assumptions of the scheme, are subject to the pre-notification procedure with the Commission, European Commission, and yet we know only from the representatives of the ministry that this will be the total financing would be split into 2 parts. So it's the own financing, which would stand at 30% of the total, and debt financing, which would be the balance of that, so 70%, which seems in that respect similar to the plans in the Netherlands. And that is for the construction phase. Obviously, it also states that those assumptions for the scheme, they cover the contracts for difference for the operational phase, and it will be 2-way contracts for difference. That is the operator, the seller of the electricity, pays to the state or it's back. The difference, which was obviously discussed by Professor Thomas. And I guess that's it. There's a lot of more to say probably, but I think I've covered the major points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this input for the Polish situation. And I'm now asking Todor if you can hear me, and if you're ready to give your input on the situation in Bulgaria.
I'm
Todor?
here.
Yeah, Todor, please.
Yes. Sound is good. Yes.
Sound is good. So please
Okay.
give your input.
My presentation. Okay, I'm Todor from Bulgaria, from Zazemyata. I have a short presentation because in Bulgaria, not real money for project Belene, Kozlodui 7-8, only like politician on or media speculation, interview from Bulgarian Ministry of Energy Ministry that okay, I'm here in USA or I'm in South Korea. Everything is okay with Hyundai and Westinghouse. Maybe you know that Bulgaria has been in a political crisis for more than 3 years. At the end of October, only for example, I say, we will have the 7th parliamentary elections for the last 3 years. That is the politicians have big differences on most issues and cannot form a government. The only thing they agree on is to have 2 new Westinghouse reactors at the Kozloduy nuclear power plant. This is very interesting, like some joke for Bulgarian political system. You see my presentation that there is decision of the parliament and government for the construction of 2 units at Kozloduy nuclear power plant with Westinghouse reactors, and construction was from Hyundai. This decision were taken without economic analysis and public discussion, and so far there is no officially announced price of the project for 2 AP1 reactors. No officially announced deadline. Like I see only speculation and interviews. From interview with participants in the negotiation, we understand that the price could be between 40 or 60 billion dollars for the construction of 2 reactors. No one is talking about the cost of building a spent nuclear fuel repository. That is, there is no talk of $2-3 billion in additional cost. We know that the practice in Europe and USA is that the construction of new nuclear power plants has a great delay and increase in cost. Colleague speak about this in our presentation. The price at the end of construction is much higher. After the meeting of the Bulgarian energy minister in the USA and South Korea in August this year, he said that negotiations are underway to find finance for this project. According to the Bulgarian minister, it was discussed with the American Exim Bank and the Korean Exim Bank, Export-Import Bank of Korea, that they participate with $8 billion each. But for now, there is no official information on this topic, no contract or agreement with these 2 banks. There is no official information from Bulgarian government or from National Electricity Company will take such a huge loan for this scale of Bulgaria. In what period and in what way that we will return this loan? Forecast for the price of electricity according to various sources from a new nuclear power plant is with very big, very high price. Is Bulgarian industry and economics is not need and not pay this money because this price is does not withstand the competition of energy from renewable energy. About it's not clear who will be responsible for returning these loans, the National Electric Company or the Bulgarian state. For now, it's not clear in Bulgaria how the project for 2 new reactors at Kozloduy will be financed because no real money for this project, no contract. We only have promises and speculation about the future of this project from Bulgarian politicians, but this is like for every new nuclear power plant project, this is typical. This is everything from me.
Thank you very much, Tudor, for this insight in the situation in Bulgaria. And yeah, now we have 2 minutes left in our regular webinar time, but nevertheless, if you have any questions or remarks after you heard about all these reports from the different countries, please speak up. Yes, Gail, please.
Yes, I just wanted to mention this. The last speaker has finally mentioned the cost of dealing with nuclear waste. And I'm wondering, we have a big problem here in Canada with that. I'm just wondering how they came up with the $2 to $3 million cost. And is this a big issue in Bulgaria?
Yes, this is very big money. This is price of $2-3 billion. This is, for example, the price in Slovakia for the same project. Like because this is very good example from Slovakia, because if I speak about French nuclear industry, this is very big money, something like $25 billion, but it is not impossible to understand Bulgarian nuclear industry between French. This is a real price is from from Slovakia is $2-3 billion dollars. This is very big money for Bulgaria.
Yes, Silva, please.
In Sweden, in this investigation, financing for new nuclear, one point was that they say it's very much important that enough kilowatt hours of electricity are produced, because the funding for the final deposition of nuclear waste is funded by those producing the waste, and that's a specific amount per kilowatt hours. So if there is not enough electricity produced, money is not sufficient for the necessary new build of waste disposal. So this is an element in the funding investigations or financing investigations in Sweden as well. which means that they want to have 4 large-scale reactors in a very short period of time. And yeah, high costs, of course.
Okay, are there any more questions or comments? Steve, do you want to have some famous last words on the issues?
Yes, I mean, what struck me with the presentations was that in every case, the nuclear expansion plans were led by government. I mean, in the past, governments have been very happy for nuclear power to go ahead. All they had to do was just sort of encourage the electric utilities, make some enabling decisions like covering insurance, guaranteeing waste disposal, and so on. Relatively low cost things. Now we're talking about very large, serious amounts of government money. Is this new enthusiasm in government, or is it the enthusiasm that was always there? And why is it that the national government treasuries are not saying something? Because, you know, they are cutting back things like health and education, yet finding billions and billions of euros for nuclear projects. The second thing I observe is what the nuclear industry has always done, which is to present things as proven that are actually not got much beyond the planning stage. So we see that in all the countries, it's a mixture of contracts for differences, regulated asset-based return, and state ownership. The contracts for difference failed where it's actually been implemented in Britain because EDF lost huge amounts of money and will never do it again. Regulated asset base seems like it might not work in Britain. It's not got to the point of investment yet. The third thing is that what is extraordinary is the rationale for things going wrong. I mean, small countries with little or no recent experience with nuclear power should be looking around the world and saying, well, look, the country that has most reactors, the United States, has made a mess of building new ones. The country with the utility that's built most reactors, France, has made a mess. The country that pioneered nuclear power, the United Kingdom, has made a mess. The country that has the best record of reliability of reactors, Finland, has made a mess. Yet we're going to do it right, despite our lack of experience. I mean, it's extraordinary. And the final point is on finance. And the interesting thing is that the vendors that we're talking about mostly can't provide the finance. Westinghouse, Framatome cannot provide that finance. The country's the most successful country this century, which has sold more reactors than the rest of the vendors put together, is Russia, and Russia is politically impossible in Europe, apparently in Hungary. China appears to be also impossible, which leaves Korea, which is a state-owned vendor, which is owned by the electric utility, so could theoretically finance reactors. And I wonder if that's the case where Korea has won tenders. Those are just my observations on one other thing, on the credit guarantees by the Exim Bank for a Westinghouse order. It's interesting, perhaps Exim Bank should be informed that Westinghouse is owned by a Canadian company, so they are giving a Canadian company US loan guarantees, which is pretty interesting idea. That was proposed for the Temelin completion when Westinghouse was owned by the British government. and it was blocked then. So maybe it would be blocked now if someone made enough publicity about Westinghouse not being owned by Americans but owned by Canadians.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve, also for your summary. We are now 7 minutes after 4, and I'm afraid I have to leave in 2 minutes sharp. But Silva and Gunther, if you okay.
It's okay. I just wanted to say that the Swedish people are very proud of their nuclear, making them competitive for energy transition, green steel. They are very proud, very satisfied, and nuclear has been financed by the government in the 70s, and they're happy to do it again. It's not what I think, but the people's.
Okay, Gunther, if you have a very short remark, then please.
Yeah, I'll make it very short. But already it's a 2019 IEA conference in Vienna. The IEA had this website up, Atoms for Climate, and they were clearly saying they want governments to make political decisions for nuclear power. And it was clear that they were understanding nuclear is no way making something in the open market. Just too expensive and too cost intensive, blah, 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 blah. This is even in the JRC report. That influenced the positions there of the European Parliament. They said it clearly. It's too expensive, blah, blah, blah. So we want loan guarantees or funding from the government to make nuclear power plants. I sent it actually to you, and maybe you can spread it or whatever. It's nothing new. So they are working on that since 5 years, I think, at least. And they want governments make new decisions for nuclear power plants because they know without government push, the nuclear government companies will never make it and not competitive. So it's, yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I want to thank everyone for their really interesting inputs into our webinar. I will put the slides on our website. I put the link again in the chat, and we will also put the recording in our YouTube channel. And I will inform you when it's on the website and on YouTube. So I will stop the recording now.